Well, before we start, after the technical glitches, I would like to see from the people in the room how many of you during break went to the restroom. And how many of you checked yourselves out in the mirror while you were in there? Reapplied your lipstick, did your hair. Me too, twice. Um, in fact, for the past week, I've been thinking about what to wear today. This was actually not my first choice, but the one I ended up with this morning. Got my hair cut the other day, colored it by myself. I think I did okay. All because, thank you. I do not have a future as a hairdresser in my future, yeah. But all because I wanted to look nice for you guys today. And if I'm honest, it's probably less about wanting to look nice and more about not wanting to look horrible. For as long as I can remember, I have struggled with insecurity. I've often wondered how my insecurity started, and there are a few things I can kind of pinpoint that make sense. I've always struggled with my weight, and as far back as, probably 6 or 7, I can remember being teased. And then there was my skin. I have a severe case of eczema, which for those of you who don't know is just a hereditary skin rash, something I've kind of learned to live with. But when I was a little girl, I was covered almost head to toe in just this bright red rash and was incredibly self-conscious about it, but there was just no way to cover it up. I can remember one specific incident. I think I was probably about 10 years old, and I was at the pool one summer with my friends in the neighborhood, and a lifeguard came up to me. He was super cute, and asked me about my skin. And he explained that he needed to know what it was so I wasn't swimming if it was something contagious. So I got a little embarrassed, and I tried to explain that it was eczema, and I was born with it, and you can't catch it. And he interrupted me and said, "Oh, I know about eczema. My girlfriend has eczema." And I remember thinking even to this day, oh my, maybe a boy someday will like me, even though I'm covered in this ugly, ugly rash. And even there were some physical reasons I can attribute my insecurity to. I know that was more than just that, because even when I was little, long before I was old enough to know about being self-conscious about how I looked, I was a very needy child. And I can remember just losing my mind when my parents would try to leave me. And I've been told, yes, I'm getting a nod, that if my parents would try to leave me with a sitter, I would actually latch myself onto my mom's leg and just lose it, just sob uncontrollably. And they would have to physically pry me off of her so my poor parents could leave the house. I grew up the middle of 3 children. I have a little brother who was adorable, and my aunt has often said that he was so cute that you couldn't stay mad at him. He grew up to be brilliantly smart, just amazing musician, and talented in so many ways. And then there was my older sister. And Sissy is 8 years older than me. So as you can imagine, see, I said it out loud. As you can imagine, when I was a little girl, I looked up to her just more than you can imagine. And I can remember when she was in high school, I would sit outside her bathroom door and watch her get ready. And I just thought that she was amazing. She was a cheerleader, and she was in her high school swing choir, and she was thin, and she was beautiful. And I looked at her, and I just thought she was perfect in every way. But I need to interject here that I couldn't have been more wrong. And it's not, no. See, that didn't get a laugh in March. See, now you're all going to feel bad when I say the next thing. Because from the outside, all my observations were dead on. But what I saw as perfection, she saw as something much different. See now, do you feel a little bad for laughing? She was struggling and filled with insecurities of her own that I, as a little girl, just was completely oblivious to. But she's going to tell you a little bit more about that later. So as I grew, my insecurities grew along with me. My self-consciousness and a painfully shy personality, they were like a double-edged sword that just did me in. I always had a few friends, but I can always remember feeling somehow just substandard. When I started junior high, I began attending a small Christian high school, and I quickly found myself an outsider. Um, it was so bad, in fact, that my parents threw a very lovely party and invited my whole class, hoping that it would help me make friends, and it did not. Um, my classmates had known each other, many of them, in elementary school, some of them as far back as kindergarten, and I was the new girl. I tried to become involved. I joined basketball in junior high, which was a disaster because I had asthma and I'm not even a little bit athletic, so that did not go so well for me. And then I played clarinet in the band. I am also not musical and was horrible at the clarinet, so I dropped out of band also. And I had to kind of laugh at myself when I was actually writing this because I thought, man, Joy, you were a loser in junior high. But, it is what I is, and I should say that I don't point this out to dwell on what a loser I really was, because I was, or have some sort of joy pity party, although if you want to feel bad for me later, feel free. But instead, I need to set up for you the things God used to teach me the lessons he has about insecurity. Of course, as an adult, I realized that God doesn't make mistakes. And because God created me, clearly there is nothing about me that is a mistake. In Psalm 139, David marvels at the care that God has taken in creating each and every one of us. And in verses 13 and 14, he says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And it's also comforting to know that God doesn't concern himself with our outer appearance. God cares about our heart. In 1 Samuel 1:16, it recounts the story of Samuel's anointing of David as king. And when Samuel first arrives on the scene, he spots a man who he is sure is the guy God has picked out to be king. But God has another plan. He says to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And that's good to know, isn't it? God doesn't care what you look like. He doesn't see you how the world sees you. He sees your heart. He sees the real you. And I was working on this message. I was searching for an illustration for a way to show you just how it is that God sees you. And then it came to me. And I'm actually going to show you a clip from one of my favorite VeggieTales movies. I just think this is just the perfect illustration of this. And this is from A Snoodle's Tale. And that's how God sees each of us too. I just love that. Love that illustration. But we're going to come back to that a little later. So back to my junior high years. I can distinctly remember the first time I realized I was good at anything. It was the beginning of my 9th grade year, and we had a new English teacher, and she had a writing assignment. I see Kleenexes coming out over here. And the assignment was, "What did you do this summer?" And I wrote about the death of my grandpa. That summer, Nanny had been diagnosed with cancer for the second time. And it was inoperable. There was nothing the doctors could do. And she was actually living with us at the time. And so I had a front row seat to her very drastic deterioration. And there are a lot of things about that summer that I can actually still remember like they happened yesterday. So needless to say, that had a very big impact on me. So that's what I wrote about. And that paper changed me in a lot of ways. It was the first thing I ever remember writing, oddly enough, and to this day I still keep that paper in a file of things that I treasure. It wasn't the actual physical act of writing the paper that changed me, though. I had actually missed a day of school because I was sick. And the next day when I came back, there goes my not crying today. Um, the day I came back, my English teacher pulled me aside and said how much she had enjoyed my paper, so much so, in fact, that she had read it aloud not only to my English class, but to all of her classes. And that was the moment that I knew I could write. And it was the first time that I felt like I was good at something, anything. And that gave me something to hold on to. And I think the reason I'm so emotional is because Mrs. Brooks is actually here today. And I invited her and I told her that I was able to stand up and tell the story in front of all these women because of you and what you taught me in speech and drama, and now I've just become a blubbering mess. So I apologize for that, Mrs. Bretz. That was not part of the speech class that I took. Um, anyhow, so yeah. So that was a very key moment in my life. And like I said, that gave me something to hold on to, something that I knew that I had that no one could take away that what I was good at. High school's better for me. I finally found a small group of friends in school that I felt comfortable around, and I'm blessed to actually have some of them here. Among them is our own Chris Nichols. We were pals back in high school. And then I also had a big group of friends outside of school. In fact, I met my husband, Zach, through that group of friends. And we still keep in touch with most of those people today. After graduation, I traveled 500 miles away to go to college. And with as shy as I was, I still to this day have no idea how I managed to go to school 500 miles away. But I did. I had a very rough first term, was extremely homesick, but I survived and stuck it out and went to college there all 4 years, and then graduated and quickly moved back to Nebraska. And it's funny how things change as you become an adult. In some ways, I grew out of the things that haunted me as a kid, and in other ways, they just kind of morphed and took on an adult form. I still get self-conscious about my weight. When my eczema flares up, I still try to hide it from people. I'm scared that people will think that if I touch them, they're going to catch some horrific disease. And so I try to hide it. And in fact, when I first started thinking about what I was going to share with you today, I had this brilliant plan that God would somehow miraculously cause me to lose all the weight that I ever wanted, and I could come up here in front of you with before and after pictures like a Weight Watchers commercial and preach to you about how great it is to love yourself how you are and be comfortable in your own skin, and did not happen. And now thinking about it, I laugh at it too and think how ridiculous it sounds, but in my head at the time, it sounded like a really good plan. Instead, what God began to do was reveal to me that my insecurity goes so much deeper than physical appearance. In fact, I think most of the time when we have insecurities, have very little to do with what we look like on the outside and much more to do with something internal. But it's much easier to blame something that people can see, isn't it, than to think about what's really eating you up inside. So what I've come to realize is that my real problem today is that I have what we call in my family a farty-yorty complex. Now, if you follow the blog, you may know what that is, and you should follow the blog. But if you don't, I will clue you in. Growing up, we heard a lot of stories from my dad about his Grandma Ellis, who was a colorful character, to say the least. And she often criticized people for giving her farty-yorty complex, which was just her way of saying they were making her feel bad about herself. And what she was trying to say is that she had an inferiority complex came out farty-orty, and to this day we use the term. So my farty-orty complex is that I feel unimportant and not worthy. And the way this has manifested itself in my life is that I have a horrible fear of being abandoned and alone. And I have this completely irrational part of me that fears that if I do the wrong thing or I say the wrong thing, the people who I love and cherish most are going to leave me. So I revert to that little girl clinging to her mommy's leg. Only now that I'm an adult, I cannot do that anymore. I suppose technically I could, but it'd be really awkward for everyone involved. So instead what I do is I avoid confrontation at all costs to avoid being put in a situation where I would have to actually physically cling to somebody, because I do it. So I'd actually like you to watch one more short video clip for me that's going to just kind of set up kind of the meat of the message for you. We are actually going to talk a little bit about trust and having faith in the one who created us. It may sound like a stretch, but I promise if you hear me out, you'll get it in the end. When I first saw this video as part of a Sunday morning message, I instantly knew I wanted to use it in an event. And I was thinking, okay, so next year's event, depending on the topic, maybe we can figure out a way to use it, and I kind of put it in the back of my mind, and then I started writing and realized I wasn't going to have to wait. In the past 2 years, or I guess 2.5 years now, God has taught me a lot. He has stretched me a lot, and he has challenged me a lot, and none of it has been pleasant. As I went through each trial, I thought it was one big, horrible lesson in faith. And while each thing I did stretch my faith, and it did teach me a lot, what I have come to realize looking back is that it was much more an exercise in building my security in Christ. I have always talked a good talk when it comes to faith. I have told countless friends, including my darling husband, the wonders of faith and how amazing it is. And that is really easy to do when you look at faith on a very superficial level. And it's not so easy when your whole world is hanging in the balance. In April 2009, Zach and I welcomed Julie Evelyn into the world. And she is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed bundle of personality. And when we first started talking about what it would mean to expand our family to 4, we sat down to try to figure out what we would do. Justice was finally going to be in kindergarten, which meant he would be in school full-time. And after years of split-shift parenting, Zach and I finally were both working days, normal hours, and had good jobs. But after much consideration, we decided that I would quit my job and start doing some freelancing. And it wasn't an easy decision or one we came back by lightly. It meant giving up nearly half of our salary. And with freelance work, there is no guarantee. There is no promise of a next paycheck. But I really felt that God was calling me to stay home, and so we decided that we would just make it work. The weeks following Julie's birth were really, really rough for us. And not just rough like it's hard adjusting to a newborn rough, but rough like there were days where we didn't see how we were going to make it through the day. And I'm not going to go into details, but by early June, things had started to look back up for us. I had actually been putting off telling my supervisors that I wasn't coming back to work, just in case. And one Monday morning, I was praying, and I felt a nudge that I needed to just step out in faith and give my notice and be done with it. So for whatever reason, I decided Friday would be a good day to do that. So I was excited and nervous all at the same time. And then a few days later, I got a call from Zach that absolutely rocked my world. He had been going through a stack of papers and found a hard copy of an email that seemed to indicate that he was going to be losing his job. He went to his supervisor and tried to talk to him, but it really did us no good. He wouldn't confirm our worst fears, but he wasn't very reassuring either, and we were just left hanging. Needless to say, we found ourselves in quite a pickle. Our gut instinct told us that, yeah, come Monday, Zach probably wasn't going to have a job. and I was planning on leaving my full-time job on Friday. And for those of you keeping track, that's me putting in my notice on Friday, 3 days before we thought we would probably know what was going on with Zach's job. And it was a rough week, to say the least. I don't know how many hours I prayed that week, and I can't tell you how many tears I shed, but I can guarantee it was a lot. Should I keep my job so we had a safety net? If I did go back to work, what was I going to do with Julie, my newborn breastfeeding baby who I wasn't producing enough milk to pump for? What would we do if we found ourselves without an income, any income? We knew Zach could find part-time work, but we had no idea how long it would take to find a part-time job in the heating and air business at a time when the economy was bad and there were companies who couldn't keep their current employees at full-time, let alone hire on a new guy. Logically, there was a very simple answer, but God doesn't always work in the realm of human logic. So what would you do? I was the woman in that video. I had trusted God for a lot. I had trusted him to get me and my family through a lot of really, really tough situations. But this made no sense. God surely wouldn't ask me to give up a good-paying, steady job that I loved, knowing that my husband was likely going to lose his in 3 days. He wouldn't do that, would he? I ran every scenario in my mind that week. I thought, okay, maybe God is planning a miracle. This was best-case scenario. I would give my notice, he would work a miracle, and Zach would be able to keep his job. Because that would still be testing me out, right? But the reality of the situation was I had no idea what Monday held. God was looking me in the eyes and saying, Joy, trust me. I got you. I'm going to catch you. I always have, and I promise in my word that I always will. In Deuteronomy 31:6, Moses is speaking to the Israelites not long before his death, and he's addressing them before they cross the river Jordan into the promised land with Joshua. And he says to them, Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And so I made what was the hardest decision of my life. I emailed my supervisors and I set up an appointment for Friday afternoon. Cried the whole drive there. I think my sister was on the phone with me for most of it. I actually cried during the meeting, and I cried the whole drive home. I was just a ball of emotion. I was nervous and scared and excited and terrified and conflicted all at the same time. Now, it would be lovely if I could stand up here and tell you that we had a happily ever after. God gave us an easy out by allowing God to keep his job. But here's the kicker. God will catch you. He promises he will. And he will prove faithful in all things. But that doesn't mean he won't let you experience the feel of falling. I can tell you from firsthand experience that the fall, it's really scary. But the catch is indescribably amazing. And as he promised, God did catch us. He provided Zach, or he brought in people that helped us financially when we needed it the most. I was able to freelance. Zach found part-time work and qualified for unemployment, and that was able to get us by. And then 2 months later, Zach was offered an amazing job that wasn't even advertised, in fact. And better than that, it's the first job that my husband has really loved, and he is happier than I have ever seen him before. But were it not for that horrific fall, we never would have experienced the joy of the catch. So you may be asking yourselves, Joy, what in the world does this have to do with insecurity? So let me bring it back for you. What God has taught me through this experience is that I am strong. I don't need to feel unworthy or unimportant or weak, because in him I am made strong. And as long as I have my eyes set on him and prayerfully consider what I do, then I can't go wrong. We're reminded in Romans 8:28 that all things work together for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. You know, if I remember that, there's no room for a farty-orty complex, because I'll be filled with the knowledge that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. that God looks at the heart and not at the appearance, and that whatever this life dishes out, God will use it for the good of his kingdom. So instead of allowing myself to be weighed down by insecurities and my fears about what other people think, I can allow myself to be lifted up by the word of God and what he says about me.